I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Professor Giovanni Ferri. Professor Giovanni Ferri. Giovanni Ferri is a professional and a scholar who has constantly addressed complex issues with a problem-solving approach by thinking out of the box and seeking innovative answers beyond mainstream views. Holding a PhD in economics from New York University, he served at Banca d'Italia, the World Bank, and the University of Bari, and is now professor of economics at LUMSA University in Rome, where he's founded and chairs the Master in Management of SDGs, graduating 90 sustainable managers for 41 different countries between 2017 and 2022. He's also graduated 6 executive masters in sustainable management. To provide innovative consulting and knowledge building towards the sustainable transition to public and private organizations, he's co-founded and as scientific chair of Sustainabilities. His research, teachings, and consulting impacts, particularly SDG 4, quality education, SDG 8, good jobs and economic growth, SDG 10, reduced inequalities, SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, and as well as SDG 17. Ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker for the conference today, Professor Giovanni Ferri. Please take up your seat.
Thank you very much, Em. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you very much, Patricia, for giving us the kickstart. It's an honor to be here, and since time is limited, I will directly go to my presentation. It is very important that a leading organization like yours, a leading network like yours, is engaged in trying to address the issues of how diplomacy can promote the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. So I will move directly to my presentation, which I decided to title SDGs at 7, Taking Stock and Looking Ahead. Why is that? Because the SDGs are now 7 years old. And believe it or not, they've been around since 2015, and they have certainly graduated to be almost halfway in the process of attainment, which should be achieved by 2030. We are all aware that achieving the entirety of the Sustainable Development Goals will be a very hard task, and we are ready to accept the idea that some of the targets will not be achieved. But in any way, this is an appropriate time to take stock and try to measure. And this is the first part of my presentation, which is going to be very quick. So I will use some graphics to show you how we can measure the progress in reaching the SDGs. And then I will move on to the second point, which is important for trying to document how Europe is exercising a leadership in the sustainable transition, and therefore it is important to be aware of that. Also for the third point, which is the North-South challenges, which are not only North-South, they are also East-West, but there will be important role for diplomacy in the future in terms of trying to reach out solutions that will, and diplomacy is going to be crucial not only to make the world better, but to achieve the common good, like in this case, that there will be conflicting views from North and South countries, from rich and less developed countries, from rich and emerging, across rich and emerging countries. So let me start with measuring progress in reaching the SDGs. How is the situation in 2022? We can use for the EU 27, unfortunately, there has been a Brexit. So I will examine the UK separately. For the EU 27, the monitoring report, which has been produced by the Eurostat, tells us that if you look at the right side of this panel, some all I mean the among the SDG, the 17 SDGs, you have that those that have been on target are above this line, which is moderate progress. These are on very good track to be achieved beyond this line, which is significant progress. We have a problem instead for those 2 or 3 targets that are below the moderate progress line, moderate movement away, actually. So we do have for European Union, EU 27, we have problems in terms of SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, and life on land, SDG 15, whereas SDG 17, the partnership of the goals, is just across the border between moderate movement away and moderate progress. We are not happy with moderate progress, but in any case, there is convergence toward the objective. And here we count 70, which is border line, then hunger, SDG 2, quality education, SDG 4, climate action, SDG 13, responsible consumption and production, SDG 12, reduced inequality, SDG 10, sustainable cities and communities, SDG 11, gender equality, SDG 5, and life below water, SDG 14. The other 6 SDGs are either across the 2 regions. So good health and well-being, SDG 3, is cutting across between the moderate progress region and the significant progress region. This has been most largely affected by the COVID-19, by the way, the pandemic. And then we have the other 5, which are more safely in the excellence area, significant progress. SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. SDG 7, affordable and clean energy. SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. Poverty is moving well ahead, at least in the European Union. And top of them is peace, justice, and strong institutions, which is being at the top. Now let's look at the UK. The situation in the UK may be described by the monitoring report for 2022. We seem to have 11 SDG in this rank. SDG in the score is 80.5, spillover score is 59.2. If we look at the individual SDGs, you can notice from this scoreboard that there is only one that is in going badly. This is SDG 10, reducing inequalities, that has been losing ground, actually going the reverse. Some other objectives are not moving strongly towards targets, like SDG 2, zero hunger, or SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities. But all the other targets are improving. All the other SDGs are improving either moderately or strongly. The moderate progress for no poverty, SDG 1, SDG 3, good health and well-being, SDG 4, quality education, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, SDG 13, climate action, SDG 14, life below water, SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institution, and SDG 17, partnerships for the goals. The excellent status is secured for 5 of the SDGs. This is number 5, gender equality, number 6, clean water and sanitation, number 7, affordable and clean energy, and number 9, industry innovation and infrastructure. So overall, if we look at the situation, there is moderate progress, at least moderate progress across Europe, both in the EU27 and in the UK. And now let's move to the second point by showing some evidences that lead us to assess Europe as the leading part of the world in terms of the sustainable transition. This is a graph which represents what the European Green Deal is doing. Since 2019, the European Green Deal has become stated a new target for becoming net zero for the European Union by 2050. This will replace the 80% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2050 with a net zero policy. Europe has been the first continent to declare that. Others are following, and possibly diplomacy is going to be very, very important in order to have the other parts of the world join. Another way to address to show this leadership, these EU leaderships, is that Europe is closest to being on track with the SDGs. If you look at the overall score, the darker color means that the country is more on target than the others, and you see that all the dark colors are gathering in Europe, not only the Nordic countries, but also the UK, France, Germany, here is Poland, and the other European countries may be a little bit lighter colored, but they still have good, nice colors. The other evidence that is telling us that Europe is leading this game is that if you take the ranking of the countries that are more on target, more advanced in terms of reaching the SDGs, you find that out of the first 20 countries, 19 of them are from Europe. The UK is 11th, Finland is the first, Portugal is the last, and 19 is Japan, is the only non-European countries to be in the first 20s. And then also, if you look at the race to net zero in terms of carbon neutral goals by country, you find that most of the countries that are down here, in the sense that they are going to achieve, or they are addressing to achieve this net zero policy earlier on, you find most of them are from Europe. So let me move to the third point because time is running, and let me move to what may be also crucial for this panel and for the network that is dealing that we are addressing today. The North-South challenges for diplomacy around the conference of the parties, but not only the conference of the parties. And here I have a couple of points that will be important, if you wish, for your consideration. One issue is, this is a very big issue, is that there will be a growing flow of migrants that are climate migrants. Unfortunately, the global warming that is is cutting across, is hitting across the world, but it is hitting more intensively some more fragile zones like the equator zones are um, are experiencing lots of problems with lack of water, and this is bringing out to conflicts, and there is desertification, as it was mentioned. So there are various estimates that have been floating around. The largest estimate is that by 2050, there will be between 200 million and 1 billion climate migrants across the world. I am saving you in order to save time. I will jump on the other two estimates that I have and come to the last point I want to raise for this conversation. Who is responsible for the CO2 emissions that are causing the global warming? This is a world map where you see that there are different responsibilities, and the rich countries are more responsible than the others, but also some of the emerging countries have a, a, a dark color, as you see. This is the cumulative carbon dioxide emissions since 1750, so before the Industrial Revolution. And this is what you see. The US is top notch, but other countries are also heavily colored in red. And this is the same world map where we calculate per capita CO2 emissions. You divide by number of inhabitants. And this is slightly different from the other map we saw. But in any case, we see a difference. We see a difference between countries that bear large responsibility for emissions, and this is the cumulative share of global cumulative CO2 emissions. At the beginning, there was only the UK, as you see, because the Industrial Revolution was realized in the UK first, and then the share of the UK has dropped dramatically. Now the largest CO2 emitter is the United States, followed by the European Union, and then China is rising, while the US and the European Union are going down, and the UK is also going down, and also India is becoming an important emitter of CO2. So there are different parts of the world. How do we deal with that? We will need a lot of diplomacy to negotiate in the rules for how to act all together to abate and revert global warming. We have, let's focus only on the last point, the North-South problem. We have strict adherence to the sovereign state system, which leads to cautious commitment rules, proactive disparity correction, proactive support for the introduction of reduction technologies, and then the current Conference of the Parties pledge and review method that is relating to these issues is considering individual sanctions and tolerance of intimidation, promotion of North-South confrontation, and carbon leakage. Now, all these issues we need to be addressed with diplomacy, or unfortunately, there will be new sources of conflicts to an extent that can be unimaginable today. Thank you for your attention. I hope I stayed within my time.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that insightful presentation. Based on what we heard from you, it's buggling to listen to, the fact that most of the North side countries have actually made progress, a moderate progress, I'd say. And hopefully by 2030, we will be gearing towards that progress. It's interesting, the North side divide and what you're talking about, diplomacy to help eliminate or make more progress on that level. I was a bit surprised to discover that EU countries also had SDG 6 to attain. I thought mainly SDG 6 were mainly to attain SD6 were mainly for South countries, but it's surprising to hear that. And then it's also exciting to notice that they're on track, to achieving these goals. And some of the statistics that you gave concerning the EU and Britain is actually quite staggering to know that, these are the levels at which we need to work hard to achieve these goals. When you talked about top 20 countries and recognizing that none of the people in the South side were even making progress in this area, except for the CO2 emissions, I'm surprised, because I was thinking that in the area of education, stuff like that. And it's also amazing how America leads the pack when it comes to CO2 emissions. I am very happy that you talked about diplomacy helping to promote the SDGs in the right direction. Obviously, diplomacy helps in most things. Without diplomacy, we would have war in a lot of areas. So it is so key that diplomacy will be a key driver to get the SDGs attained. Thank you so much for that presentation, and we're very, very grateful for that.